Okay, so today we're going to be taking a look at one of the laptops that I featured in my kind of laptop retrospective overview. These are all laptops that I've owned for years and used heavily in whatever point of life I was at the time. And this is actually, to my knowledge, it was the first Acer Aspire One to hit the local market. This is the model AOA150. Base model had the Intel Atom super slow N270 CPU, 512 megabytes of RAM, 120 gigabyte hard disk. It was as bare bones as you could get for a computer. But that being said, you still had microphone, headphone, 2 USB, a card reader, as well as VGA out, which I actually had hit or miss luck with this, probably just due to how much power is going down that port. You also had your Ethernet, another USB, and a card slot for expanding the storage. So there was a card slot for reading regular memory cards. There was also a card slot for expanding the storage. This, in the year 2017, really doesn't look like much, but here's the thing that you need to understand, is that this was bought almost 10 years ago. Now, I'm going to pull out my not-so-scientific scale because I want to prove a point. And that is what this was designed to be used for and how I used it. So, I was a student. And this weighs 1.056 kilograms, or for those of you that speak pounds, that's 2 pounds and 5 ounces. This was super light. And I was a student. In comparison, let's take a look at the laptop, my very first laptop that I was using before, which was this old school Toshiba Satellite A10. Boof! Yeah, that's significantly heavier. That's 2.774 kilograms, or 6 pounds, 1 ounce. This is a beast. And it really... There was a lot of reasons why this didn't work out, but that's a whole different video. So let's put that scale to the side since we've proven the point, and take a look back at this. So this was a netbook. It is really bare bones. The keyboard is super small, but it was a keyboard. You had a screen, you had a webcam, you had a microphone. This was, in my opinion, and still remains, the ultimate budget student netbook. Because unlike every other laptop that was bigger at the time, you couldn't fit those on a lecture desk. Like your lecture desks at the university I went to were literally maybe a little bit bigger than the actual computer itself. So I needed something that was small, compact, that had battery life to last forever. And I'm going to school in 2007, 2000, like in that mid-2000 era. Everywhere I went, there were people that had like larger laptops that were literally chained to the wall every 3 or 4 hours to recharge their batteries. With this guy and the extra battery that kind of props the display up, I had like 8 or 9 hours of battery life. I never had to seek out a power outlet. I could type all my notes on this thing. No problem. I needed nothing else. And what you need is, again, another topic for perhaps another video. So why am I still looking at this thing in the year 2017? Well, I had to do a little bit of work on it. This was actually being used by a family member, and they shipped it back to me and said, make it work again because I actually like to use this. And I'm like, okay. So we solved the major hardware issues, but this machine originally shipped with Windows XP, and in the year 2017 that system is so far out of date that Google Chrome will even yell at you saying you need to update your OS, get with the times. So today we are going to be doing a couple of things. First off, we are going to do some hardware upgrades. So you might say, why in the world are you bothering to do a hardware upgrade on a computer this old? Like, doesn't that really defeat the purpose? Like, aren't you going to be spending more money on this thing than this thing is actually worth? And truth be told, yeah, pretty much. However, it's still cheaper than buying a brand new machine, and this does what the person that is currently using it, that they need it for. They don't want anything else, and to get a laptop this small, running a dedicated OS that's not a Chromebook, good luck. It's a pretty tough market. So we're going to upgrade the RAM to a gig. Get that in the frame there. And we are going to be installing a AOA150 gigabyte SSD, which is pretty much the same cost that buying one of these used would be now. So we are literally going to double the value of this laptop netbook. So I'll be kind of going through the step-by-step, and if you're curious to know what operating system will be going on this, it will be a Linux distro, and more on that later. So without further ado, let's get our favorite disassembly tools. I'm just going to zoom out a bit on the workspace here, and let's crack this thing open. Okay, so here are the tools that we're going to be using today. Some plastic containers to put all of our screws in. We have a credit card shaped object, which does not have to be a credit card, any plastic card will do. Or if you have a guitar pick, that can work well, although for this particular takedown I found that the card was just a little bit thicker. And a series of screwdrivers and a larger pry tool if we need it. So they don't build them like they used to, is definitely what I would say going into this thing. The good news is that you can actually get into this machine. The bad news is it is literally held together with 8 billion screws. Let's get started by removing the battery. So that is done. And again, I have the fatter battery that kind of acts as a rear kickstand for the keyboard. It was actually really nice. Take your favorite Phillips screwdriver. There's a screw right there, there's a screw right there, and there's a screw right there that we need to take care of. The other screws that you're going to need to remove are actually under the feet here. So I have already removed these once, so the adhesive lets go a little bit easier than it will if you've done that for the very first time. So just go ahead and peel these back. Don't be too worried about whether or not the adhesive will still stick after you remove them. As I said, this isn't the first time I've taken it apart, and that adhesive, even after 10 years, is still pretty persistent. So while I'm taking this apart, a bit of, computer history, can't help but talk about it. This was one of the first, truly small little laptops. This one does not have a lot of accessibility. That would be its biggest critique. The only thing you're going to access is this expansion port, which I'm going to go ahead and undo those screws now. This particular model, way back in the day, you could actually get with a 3G SIM card, believe it or not. And if I recall correctly, this was a wireless card slot, but if you look back here, see if that comes up on the camera, there's actually a slot there for certain models to be punched out and have an SD card go in there. Just a kind of piece of neat trivia. Okay, so we have 3 more screws up here underneath the battery compartment. These are a little thinner than your standard screw, so they're going in another bin so we don't mix those up. And the nice thing, of course, is that all of these screws just come out. They're not proprietary or any silly nonsense like that. So we've got all the screws removed from the bottom so far. So we're going to flip it open and we're going to open it up. And this is going to require a bit of camera magic here, so just bear with me for a moment. because I want to show you very closely the next step. So in 3 places on the keyboard, there are little tiny clips. And there are 3 of them. There's one above the F2 key, there's one above kind of the F8 key, and there's also one above the pause, where am I? There, the pause break key. Now the easiest way to pop these without damaging the keys is not to use the metal screwdriver, but to use your plastic prying tool, or in my case, this old MasterCard. And you have to kind of show no fear when you do this. So I'm going to zoom back out. And the challenge is just wedging it in there against the clip and pressing right down and in. So you want the card to be kind of sticking up out of there. Again, don't be afraid. You're not going to bust the keyboard or snap those clips. They're pretty durable. And you got to make sure that they don't automatically reseat themselves, which they have a nasty tendency of doing. And this is the tricky part, and this will literally take you the longest in terms of disassembly. There we go. So once you've got your card in there, slide it along. That clip's pop back into place, but I'm underneath, so pop. And with all 3 of those clips gone, there are 2 on the sides, but really all you need to do is flex the keyboard up, pop, pop, and your keyboard's ready to come out. So I'm gonna zoom back out a little bit. So lift your keyboard up. Underneath, you're going to see this ribbon cable. For demonstration purposes, I'll just show you with the screwdriver right there. It's got a little black flap. Flip it, keyboard comes out. So we can put that off to the side. There are some screws here that have kindly been labeled with arrows that need to be removed. So there is a really small stainless steel colored Phillips screw here that is completely different from the rest. Why? I don't know, but we're going to remove that and place it off to the side by itself. Now that we've got the screws that are holding this guy out, we need to actually pry, gently of course, this upper casing off. Before we do that, there is a clip down here that's going to require our attention, and that is the trackpad. So just like before, we're going to flip up this black piece of plastic, and for clarity I'm going to use this so you can see. Again, normally we don't want to use those, we want to use plastic tools. And we're going to pull that cable up and out. It's got a little blue tab, super easy. So very gently, take your fingers and just start working around the edge. And again, we're going to use our super cool card tool, and we are going to just go around and defeat a couple plastic clips. Twisting the card is more than adequate to get these plastic clips to let go. You don't need to put too much force on it. Just go around the edges, twist it, move it, twist it, move it, twist it. Okay, there is one screw that we missed over there, no big deal. That'll easily come out. Put that over there. Alright, and that's the last clip. And when we go to lift this up, you want to lean it forward to get, there's little plastic cups underneath both of the hinges. Now let's see if we can get a good angle of that. So just wiggle it out and eventually it'll come free. There's nothing attached here, so we can just put this off to the side. So there you go. Here is our computer guts. So there's actually a small amount of memory wired to the board, but that's kind of irrelevant. Here we go. Over here, this is just I/O for the right-hand side of the computer. This is the wireless card, This, of course, is your integrated motherboard, and under here is actually the hard drive that we're going to replace. And then underneath on the other side, when we take it out and flip it over, you will see the actual memory stick that we will be upgrading as well. On the motherboard here, there aren't really too many screws retaining this bad boy in. They're pretty well marked. They're going to be all of your center screws, and I knew I was going to be taking this apart, so I really didn't put that many back in. The first thing that we can do is go ahead and remove our wireless card. So it's one screw here. And then of course we have to pop off our antenna. Black on top, white on the bottom. Move that off to the side. Interestingly enough, the antenna for this actually runs up into the screen. So it hinges up and pulls out. And if you're curious to know, it is an Atheros AR5BX B63. It is not that fast. But again, the computer was designed to be portable first, fast. Not really, wasn't really designed to be fast. Let's go ahead and remove this. Our I/O expansion board, which is kind of interesting that they left all of this space, but they also have multiple models going into this particular chassis of computer. So you do have ports on this side that will need to be wiggled free. So don't be afraid to wiggle. And if you flip this over, you're going to have a ribbon cable that you'll need to detach. There are little tabs on either side, and my recommendation is just walking it out with your fingernails, just like that. So this was your 2 USB, your headphone microphone, as well as your SD card. And this would be your actual SD card reader. The SD card reader over on this side would be for storage expansion. We're going to move this wire out of the way, as much as it will move. And yeah, so our board, after a lift check, is ready to go. We do need to detach the display cable, and this ribbon is kind of funny, I think. We'll zoom in a little bit there. It's got this really weird metal connector that if you look at it on camera and with your eyes, it doesn't look like it's like sitting in there properly, but it works. But this just looks like tape holding it together. It's kind of funny. So just like the I/O cable that we detached over there, fingernail on either side, and just wiggle. Like that. And yeah, it kind of sticks like tape. Maybe because it is. Alright, so when you're removing this, there is a little metal tab that has been folded over. So the whole board kind of, I'll zoom out a little bit. The whole board is going to go thunk, thunk, thunk. Remember, thunk, thunk, thunk. So you lift it up. Get a bit more of a zoom here. So kind of lift it up and ever so slowly just walk it out. Again, you really got to pay attention to that one corner. That's where everything kind of gets a bit tricky. All right. Oh, we forgot an I/O port there. That's actually for the speakers. Again, fingernails either side. Pop that out. There we go. So before we continue with the upgrade, let's just take a look at the guts here. Like, this is all plastic. You've got 2 speakers here, downward firing, terrible of course. The whole thing is plastic. It stood the test of time, and that's something to be said. Like, the hinges are super beefy, never had a crack or any issues there. And say what you will, but it was a good little machine. I'm not going to disassemble the display because I'm not working on that today. Lots of vents though, but required when you only have one fan. And as you see when we turn this thing over, it's super tiny. Here's our board. And here are the guts that you normally see on a computer when you open it for the very first time. This is the SD card reader for the expansion component of it. Here is your fan that has a duct that's pulling the air away. Your single slot of memory, and this actually has a Samsung stick. 512 R216 PC2 5300S, which isn't terrible. I guess terrible is kind of relative. So what we are going to be putting in is PC2 6400 1 gig stick. So that's really easy. If you've ever opened a computer, 2 metal clips, click clack, wiggle it out, take this guy, stuff it in, click. We've upgraded the RAM. Let's take a look at removing the hard drive caddy. It's got 2 screws. Screwdriver. Spin that out. They're not captive, but they are that silver color, so they are, oops, they are different. And I don't know, when you look at this computer, yeah, it's 10 years old and say what you want, but I don't know, I can't help but seeing like design aspects of like the Raspberry Pi and the microcomputers we have today. Like, this is a computer, guys. It's small. So we just wiggle this out. There we go. And as you can see, some dust and stuff has gotten underneath of this tape, for the lack of a better word, that they have to protect the circuitry. If you're really particular, you could clean that out. This is the hard drive and the hard drive caddy. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 screws that we need to pull out to remove the hard drive from the caddy so we can install the caddy back on the board and push it on. Again, to do that, very simple, and that just slides right out. So we'll keep note of the orientation on how this went in. We have power and the SATA connector here, so the other hard drive will go in like that. I have to say, it's a little humbling to be holding the hard drive that's got most of my university education on it. We'll take our hard drive, and again, remembering the orientation, drop that into place. Now you'll notice that our holes do not quite line up unless we move it down. So there is a bit of a gap. So to solve the gap, ADATA includes this little plastic piece. And you could get little sticky tabs if you really want to do that. I don't particularly care. And now our holes line up. So that will just stop the rattling of the hard drive that could potentially drive you a little crazy. The RAM upgrade that you're seeing on this video today was done because I had a 1 gig stick lying around, and the motherboard and processor will only detect 1.5 gigs, which is a very strange arbitrary number, and there's reasons why this computer can only do that. So I figured, well, I don't really want to use a 2 gig stick, because if, 512 megabytes of that RAM isn't going to be used, I don't want to stick it in there. And I'm also putting this solid state hard drive into the computer, which is going to give it far, far more of a performance boost than 512 megs of RAM will, especially considering that we're dealing with DDR2. Yeah, it's not a spring chicken. All of our screws are good to go, and our orientation is correct. So we're just going to go and firmly place that back on. Take the 2 screws that are holding the caddy in place, line those up. And you know what? While we're in here, let's take a look at what's going on under this fan. On the off chance that there's actually any thermal paste under here, it's probably ancient. So let's find out. No, there isn't. There is. Oh, it's that sticky stuff. It's, yeah, so this is like a thermal pad. It's not even thermal compound. So this chip here is the actual CPU, 1 gigahertz, 512, 533. It's ancient. So you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna put a little bit of thermal Arctic silver on this guy, I think. Like, it totally doesn't deserve it, but we're gonna do it anyway. We have our tube of Arctic silver thermal paste here. We have a alcohol prep pad. Isopropic alcohol works just great. And 2 Q-tips. I always have those on standby because you never know how this junk is gonna come off. Before we get carried away, let's take a look at how this is put on, because this is a bit different. There's like a little square here that corresponds to this surface here, and there's just a big indiscriminate square here that would normally go on there. I have a feeling that these are so old they will just come right off. So with a little bit of rubbing, there we go. Yeah, that's not probably doing its job very well anymore, which is ideally why this thing was probably running so hot. So again, we're going to take this and just go peel that right off. Again, you know, it was cheap. It was so cheap. And that's how you save some money, right? Like, this alcohol pad probably cost me more. So let's just clean these areas. And if we want to be careful, I'm just wrapping the Q-tip in the swab, getting that nice and moist, and very carefully cleaning the CPU area. Get that nice and dry. It looks so clean now. Take another dry Q-tip, make sure that all of the isopropic alcohol is off. And we'll take our tube, and I can already hear all the tech enthusiasts going, "Rate my paste job, do it!" So yeah, if you really want. Now, do I want to do a dab or an X? You know what, let's do an X. Easy does it. Boop. Bloop. Okay. And for this one, we're going to do a line. So there you go. The golden rule is resist the urge once you've placed it down to pull it back up and look, because that creates air bubbles, and air is a poor heat transfer tool. Kind of giving this computer every single chance it could possibly get in terms of extending its life, improving performance, everything from the RAM to the hard disk to the thermal paste. And for whatever reason, my ham hands are having a real difficult time with this one screw. It's a good thing I'm not live streaming this, or the chat would be like, "How could you not do this, you fool?" So installation is reverse of removal. So we're gonna go ahead and reassemble it and start to talk about OS. Okay, so we've got it all back together. I did a quick power test. It's detecting the RAM. The hard disk is there. So the only thing that I've done to this computer that I haven't tested is the thermals, and the BIOS is pretty thin in there, so there is no utility, at least that I can find immediately, that'll let me do that. So we will do that when we go to do the live CD of the distribution of our choice here, and today that will be Linux Mint 32-bit because of the Atom processor. For ease, I'm using an external hard disk. or not an external hard disk, an external DVD-ROM. And we got all these USB ports, so we might as well use them. If you have never done this before, the method is pretty straightforward. We're going to hit F12 on the keyboard to change the boot load order. But before we do that, we got to make sure our disk is in there. So what we'll do is we'll just orient ourselves a little bit. So pardon the camera wiggle. And focus. Pardon the glare. There we go. So we're going to go down and choose the USB CD-ROM. The chief reason that we're going with a Linux distro is for really kind of three reasons. First off, Windows XP is expired. No more security updates, so we're not putting that back on. I know that people have put Windows 7 and other versions of Windows on this, but I just think that the hardware is old enough at this point that it's going to tax the heck out of it, and you're not going to get the performance that we're going to want out of this unit. And thirdly, and this is not as well known, but if you check the Wikipedia page as well as Acer's documentation, is that these shipped with Linux distros on them from Acer at one point. So all of the hardware is already compatible. You don't need to worry about Wi-Fi cards or any of that. It all works with the hardware. So if I can get a modern operating system that is still being updated, that isn't going to throttle my computer or tax the CPU or kill the battery when I'm mobile, why wouldn't I do that? And as a media consumption / traveling computer, which is how this is used right now, they use it to charge all their USB stuff, they use it to take photos off of their SD cards. This is really all you need to do that. Once it has booted into Mint here, I'm going to install pSensor to check to see what our CPU is operating at, how fast our fan is spinning, and just the general internal temperatures of the unit. I'm really curious to know if this flimsy thermal pad that I pulled out of there was doing its job, or if the Arctic Silver that I've squirted on the CPU and what I can only assume is the integrated GPU has made any performance difference. And then once we're done that, we're going to install Linux onto the SSD, and then we're going to do a boot test, which I'm actually really excited for, because it's like shaking your hand with a really old friend and saying, you know what, I haven't seen you in a really long time. Come into my house. I want to catch up. Let's reconnect and you know, do something cool just that one last time like we did in the old days. And I've got a lot of fond memories of this little netbook, and yeah, I want to give it the most amount of life that I possibly can. In terms of temperatures, the Temp1 sensor, which is probably on the motherboard somewhere, I don't know the location of it, is hovering around pretty steady 45 degrees. It peaked at 50 while I was doing some stuff in the background. The core, so the CPU, is at a very nice 31 degrees Celsius while idle, which is, in terms of CPUs, really, really cold. Let's see, the hard drive is at a comfortable 37 to 35 degrees. So yeah, this thing, maybe if we can get it to go under load, will get significantly warmer. But I don't want to do those tests until the OS is installed, because all of this live is just going off of the RAM. Nothing's been written to the hard disk yet. So we'll take a look at those numbers, but we're going to have to do the boot test next. Mint is finished installing. I have a timer ready to go. So once we see the BIOS, okay, there's our screen to interrupt the BIOS. We'll start our timer. 30 seconds is a pretty average boot time for a computer that isn't running SSD and quad core and all that good stuff. So is it impressive for like a computer? No. Is it impressive for a 10-year-old netbook running a Atom processor? Yes, I would certainly say so. So that is probably going to conclude this first kind of video series on the Acer Aspire One, a little bit of the history, one of the reasons why I picked it, and also kind of maybe getting it up and running in the year 2017 for the person that literally just wants like the absolute bare minimum basics. You can pick one of these up used under $100, and in fact you probably pick up a better spec version than this one for under $100. And then you just buy a hard drive, you throw it in there, and there you go. You've got decent, and put that in air quotes, decent computing power, even in the year 2017. So with a small investment, going in there, making a couple of tweaks, making sure everything is good to go, you still have a contender. So hopefully you've enjoyed this. One more thing I'm going to note is while we were off camera, I decided to put a little bit of swag on this unit. So we've got some Linux Mint stickers for the keycap as well as the badge there. And those are provided by Unix Stickers. So if you haven't heard of them or want to check them out, I'll leave a link in the description below. So hopefully you've enjoyed this. If you have any questions about this particular unit or something you want to see me do with it, let me know and I'll get around to making that video. Cheers!